Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Jake Gordon and Alex Sword. Yesterday, we opened up our show with a little bit of a somber attitude talking about Michael Soroka, but I think we can now toss that out the window because I flipped totally. Listen, he had Tommy John. I think his career might have been over. His Braves career definitely would have been over. But now I'm looking at this, and I even wrote an article up on the site. Go check it out at sportstalkatl.com saying, how should we view Michael Soroka's 2023 campaign? And to me, it's a resounding success. Listen, he avoided catastrophic injury. He hasn't done that in 3 years. He basically hasn't pitched in 3 years. He got 120 innings under his belt. He flashed at times. He worked on his mechanics. He pitched really well in Gwinnett. He overall pitched very well this season, maybe not in the major leagues. And yes, we all thought he was going to have an impact. But to me, hey, you avoid injury, you get 120 innings under your belt. You have a full offseason where you can be healthy, assuming that this arm injury is nothing bad. To me, that's a win. If you're talking about Michael Soroka, like, yes, did we have a little bit higher expectations, but maybe those expectations were set a little too high in the first place. So I think you look back at this season, and I as a Braves fan and as a Michael Soroka fan and someone that wants him to come back, it's a win to me.
Yeah. We talked about this yesterday. He's still not a guarantee to make the roster next year. And I really hate that. But I do think that the Braves they're gonna give this thing one last ride. I don't think they're gonna quit just yet. This was always gonna be kind of a recovery year. I don't think there's any point in cutting your losses now. I mean, you've kind of already made it this far. I think he still has another year of control. I'm so sick of talking about his years of control. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything about it ever again after this. So yeah, I think there's still ample time to see what you have. And, they've run into even this year, as good as they've been, they've run into times when they've really needed starters. I think they've started the most pitchers this year than they have at any other point in franchise history or whatever. What was it, like 17 guys have made starts?
I think they legitimately had 16 or 17. It's been ridiculous.
So why would you get rid of a guy whenever this is something that's clearly been a problem? So I don't think they're going to cut bait with Soroka just yet. I'm happy to give him a little more time. And, if he's just down in Gwinnett, who's coming up to take that 40-man spot? It's not like the Braves are just teaming with top prospects that are pushing them up now at this point. It's just not like it used to kind of be like that when you had like guys like Muller, Davidson, Bryce Wilson, guys like that. You were kind of wanted to get all these guys tried out, but that's just not the case anymore. So,
yeah, I think resounding success is probably not the word I would use. Resounding success would be him staying fully healthy and looking like a competent pitcher. The stuff Chase loves to say, the stuff was there. The control was just never there. Every single start I watched for the Braves, he hit at least one batter, gave up a bad home run, a couple of meatballs. A success, though, nonetheless. Like, resounding success would be him coming up and looking like he could be a part of this rotation right now. But it's a success nonetheless. The guy's healthy. We think it wasn't catastrophic. It feels like if this was June, he could go down, just rest, shut it down, and then potentially come back. There's just not enough time left in the season for him to do that, is what it seems like. Obviously, we don't have the actual details on the injury. It's just, we're just getting that inflammation diagnosis. But a success nonetheless, especially listen, I'm sure Soroka is not satisfied. These elite athletes, these alphas are never going to be satisfied. But as a fan, and I'm sure as the organization feels, they've got to feel good about him just completing a full year without, suffering, a catastrophic injury.
Yeah, I just think the expectations, even by myself, and I think across everyone, were just set. The bar was set too high. Like, in my opinion, the fact that you got essentially a full season out of him without suffering any major injuries, listen, forearm inflammation. I think a lot of people don't realize how much he had to adjust, how many adjustments he was making. He was reworking his entire windup and all that stuff. And I think, honestly, he also hasn't pitched in 3 years. The fact that he had 120 innings and he got some forearm inflammation, that's kind of to be expected. Like, I was almost surprised they didn't shut him down once he got around this mark. I think this was probably going to be his last start, or one of his last starts. Mark Bowman even said they wanted to pitch Darius Vines, but they had to bring Ben Heller up, and then they had to use Michael Soroka. So they didn't even want him to come up and pitch in this spot. I think they were very close to where, like, he was on his final start or last start, and this obviously just made it a resounding, whatever kind of success you want to call it. I just think There's a lot of Braves fans there. I mean, I saw DFA, I saw disappointment, I saw he's toast. And I just think the reality of the situation is, especially by those guys, expectations were set way too high. Listen, control's always going to be the last thing to come. Control was obviously an issue. And it wasn't just control walking batters, hitting batters, like you said. It was control missing the ball over the middle of the plate, just like we saw against the Cardinals, and ending up with home runs. I mean, you go look at his home runs per 9 compared to his career. This was a guy who never gave up home runs. Not only did he not walk people, he never gave up home runs. He probably, if he was qualified, would be up there with the guys who give up the most home runs in the entire league. I think it's almost doubled. So listen, his control was clearly off, but like he said, all the adjustments you had to make, everything like that, control is always going to be the last thing to come. I'm sitting here happy, and maybe I'm a little more happy because I thought yesterday we might be talking about the end of the road. And I'm like, this guy's going to now have a full off season, which he hasn't had in 3 or 4 years, and then come back and have a legitimate chance to make the roster. Because listen, we've seen the 5th starter spot this year. He's going to have a chance to make the roster next year. It's definitely not a guarantee. He's not guaranteed anything, but he's going to have just as good a chance, especially if Charlie Morton decides to hang it up, to make this roster.
And even if he doesn't make it, like if he begins the year in Gwinnett, injuries are inevitable. Like he will certainly have a shot. Health permits. He will certainly have a shot to establish himself at the major league level next year. There's no doubt about that.
Bryce Elder started the year in Gwinnett too. And I mean, we saw how that went. One of the things I did want to note too, and you talk about next year with the 5th starter, this next year is, I think, undoubtedly going to be the make or break year, because you look at the guys like Hurston Waldrop, Cade Kuehler, Drew Hackenberg, all these guys they just drafted out of college. They're pitching well, and we know how fast the Braves move these guys up, and we're going to talk about them later. But the fact of the matter is there is some competition coming. So,
yeah, I mean, we're going to do an entire segment on them. But yeah, I read about it. I said all of a sudden the Braves, with the insert of this 2023 draft class, kind of like you got some arms to get excited about, which outside of AJ Smith-Shawver, you really didn't have. And maybe you can throw Darius Vines in there. He's looked decent in his couple of outings, but really you didn't have those high-powered guys that you think could be, middle of the rotation frontline guys, even outside of AJ Smith-Shawver. So I 100% think this is the end of the road. I think he's going to sign another 1-year, $2 million deal, just like they did. I think he avoids arbitration. There's really no point. I think they try this thing one more time. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like you said, Jake, early in the thing, they've gone this far. Why give up now? He at least got through. And listen, 3.4 ERA in Gwinnett is nothing to scoff at. Like, he definitely flashed some things down there to where you think that he could make it. But yeah, the control isn't quite where it needs to be. And I think in due time, it will get there. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about Spencer Strider. His NL Cy Young bid is probably now over, but why do we get these kind of outings from him?